Drew here, and just when I thought I had my bearings, I now feel like I have no idea what is going on in Servant anymore. I do know that I am a great admirer of Lauren Ambrose and the performance that she gives this episode. The way that she captures Dorothy's growing paranoia, or is it paranoia, and establishes the way that this character is thinking and gives the audience an understanding of what's going on in her mind, but also shows enough, disheveledness and uncertainty and fearfulness that you can kind of understand why her father would come to the conclusion that his daughter might be a danger to herself and to her child. Lauren Ambrose just nails every moment of this episode. It was really an episode focused on her after a season that's really been dominated by Leanne. But I'm really not sure how to view this struggle between Leanne and Dorothy for the house and for the Turner family anymore. In a sense, I guess they're battling for Jericho to see who will get to be Jericho's mother. And I don't really find myself feeling that either of them should be his mother. In fact, I find myself wanting to side with Julian and with Sean. Why can't you two just get along and mother the child together?
I think it would be best for everyone if you could just find a way to make peace with Leanne.
Last episode, we saw this game-changing moment where Leanne seemingly caused the death of Isabel. And again, in typical Servant fashion, it's hard to tell how much of this we should view as real, how much of this we should question and say, well, there is a natural explanation for this if you're looking for it. It could have just been an accident.
Last night, when you said you wanted to help, do you somehow blame yourself for what happened to Isabel?
But Leanne certainly seems to think that she caused this to happen. And as we see Dorothy spiraling, as she seems to be questioning the nature of Leanne and whether Leanne has any kind of powers that go beyond the natural realm, I feel that I'm a little bit distrustful now of the way that the show has been portraying Leanne. For instance, that menacing laugh last episode after Isabel died, that gleeful kind of smile, I feel that perhaps we shouldn't take that too literally. It might just be Dorothy's view of how Leanne reacted to that moment. And obviously, it's possible that Dorothy is insane. It's possible that some of the things we're seeing on this show are her delusions for sure. I tend to suspect that that's not the case, but it's definitely a possibility, definitely something to consider. But I think that the way that she has come to view Leanne kind of permeated this episode.
I understand that girl better than any of you.
Every time, for the most part, that Leanne was on screen, it was Dorothy's perspective of Leanne. We were seeing Leanne as this menacing figure who is a parasite that's kind of wormed her way into their home. And that's very much how Dorothy sees her. I think the truth about Leanne is a lot more nuanced than that, and I think that Julian and Sean recognize that as well. I think that it would make it easier to find our bearings in this show if we could paint Leanne as this just complete villain. It would make it easier to know, what we should be rooting for, that we should just be rooting for the Turner family to get rid of her and her influence. But I suspect that things have a little bit more complexity than that, and I'm interested to see what direction they take the show. I really have no idea where they're going, which is why I say I'm really having a hard time knowing what to think of this show anymore. This episode, as pretty much every episode this season, was marvelously directed. There were some really stunning shots. I particularly liked this long shot that followed Dorothy as she went walking outside her room at night with Jericho, and this stalking shot as we realize that Leanne is watching her. I loved all the moments in this episode where the cameras were highlighted, the fact that different people in the house were covering the cameras or were aware that they were being observed by the cameras, and how that kept happening. I think that the surveillance state in the Turner home has been really interesting this season. Great execution of the twist this episode, I thought, that Dorothy is the one that is actually in danger of being committed, even though she thinks that everyone is on board with getting Leanne committed. That to the outside observer, if you're watching these two, and it's understandable that if you weren't inside the household and you were watching the behavior of Leanne and Dorothy, Dorothy is the one that you would probably think was the nut job, and it's understandable why her father reacts the way that he does and why he thinks she's a threat to her own child. But it's interesting because it's unclear how much of this Leanne is aware of and how much she is actually allowing her desire for Dorothy to fill this mother surrogate role for her, how much she's allowing that to let her be tricked. But what is not, I think ambiguous is that at some point she knew what was going on, and she was smart enough not to give anything away to this psychiatrist that would allow herself to be committed. And I think she knew exactly how Dorothy would come across to him, and she let him meet with her anyways. I think that, Julian, we see him stepping up a little bit more this episode in defense of Leanne. I think she's clearly like a drug to him at this point. She's his substitute for other substance abuse.
I don't know how to stop. You don't understand who she is.
I feel like this is probably an unhealthy relationship, and his going to bat with Dorothy for her is more than likely just him being worried about losing his supply of Leanne. And he's not capable of dealing with that any more than the rest of the Turner family is capable of dealing with a single day without alcohol. So, there's a lot of ambiguity in all of the relationships here. I think that this show really, really has moved away from some of the more feel-good dynamics that they might have gone for, and have really moved towards just nasty character dynamics. And Dorothy this episode is absolutely resistant of the reality of this situation. She's been resistant from the beginning, but it's a situation that most of us would have trouble believing if we were in her shoes. So this was an interesting episode. The final moment when Leanne, manages to protect Dorothy from being committed, but gets her back kind of by showing that she was watching her the night before, singing this song, this lullaby, showing her that even though Dorothy thought she was alone, that Leanne was there. That was just a chilling moment. And even though I have trouble sympathizing with Dorothy a lot of the time, because she's so overbearing and so controlling, understandably in some cases, this was a moment with her back against the wall where I feel like with Lauren Ambrose's just pitiful performance, I really feel like most people are going to have a hard time not sympathizing with Dorothy, even just a little bit. I also thought that the moment, it was interesting because so much of this episode, as I said, is Dorothy's view of Leanne, and I think that played into the way that I felt about Leanne when Dorothy was in her bedroom taking those pictures of her notebook. But I found myself, as Leanne was creeping back into the house, thinking that, oh, she must know she's up there because she's omniscient. And I realized that she probably doesn't know, but it feels like she knows everything. She's become so powerful that it's just really, really frightening. And I'm finding myself increasingly buying into Dorothy's delusions about Leanne. Not that everything that Dorothy thinks about Leanne is a delusion, but I think that Dorothy gives her a lot more credit and is blaming her for things that she hasn't actually done at times. A little bit of doubt seeped in for me too when Dorothy questioned Leanne.
Last night, when you said you wanted to help, do you somehow blame yourself for what happened to Isabel?
So that was an interesting moment because once again, the seeds of doubt were kind of sown for me. So all in all, I thought it was another solid episode of Servant, and I'm really curious to see where they go in the finale. This was only 28 minutes. I'm curious if the finale is any longer. I would like for it to be, because I would like a little bit more of a dose of this show next week before it's gone for a really long time. But I just love the craft and the atmosphere of this show. I know some of you are getting tired of not having answers and that the plot moves at a very, very gradual pace, to say the least. But I'm along for the ride. I am not going to quit this show. But let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of Servant and other shows, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, thanks for watching.